Welcome to section 2.2. We are dealing with slope. Now, slope is a concept that you did discuss in Algebra 1 and Geometry, but I want to go back and make sure that we are all on the same page. Slope is considered the ratio of a vertical change, which is up and down, to a horizontal change, which is left and right. Now, that is not necessarily the way you think of it. The phrase that we are most used to hearing is rise over run. Okay, and that is probably the most common phrase for slope. And so as we go through, I do want to talk about this. Now, I've boxed in some of the important information for you, and I will start along the way just so you know. As we look at 2 points, you can see this visual over here on the right-hand side, where they tell you rise is the change in the y's, and we normally take the second y value minus our first value, and the run is the change in the x values, which is normally the second value minus the first value. So in order to find this, we said to find slope, it's rise over run, which is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And this is the one that I'm going to use the most. However, on a side note, as long as your subtraction occurs in the same order, so I could do y1 minus y2, as long as my x values get subtracted in the same order, you'll get the same slope. So you may use either form. I will tell you, though, I tend to use this one just because that's what I'm used to. But again, here's the biggest thing. Y is on top, X is on bottom. Now, there are 4 types of lines that we're looking at. One line has a positive slope. And so if I just draw a picture for you, and your picture can look slightly different than mine, that's fine. I have a line that starts low on the left and goes up high on the right. And to describe that line, and I'm going to put a star by it, we say it rises from left to right. Okay, a negative slope is a line that starts high and goes down, and I'm going to star that again so you know which one I'm talking about, and we say that line falls. The third type is a zero slope, and when we talk about a zero slope, I want to introduce fractions here, because in order for a fraction, it's rise over run, to equal 0, 0 has to occur on top, and you can get any other number on the bottom. And so if 0 is on top, in order to get a zero slope, that means that you have no rise. So if I'm not going up and down, then my line is horizontal. So I'm going to put horizontal in here. And again, we're trying to show it to you in terms of fraction, in terms of description, and then its exact word, horizontal. The last one is an undefined slope, and in order to get an undefined slope in a fraction, 0 has to be on the bottom, and you can have any number on top. And again, we don't leave our answers in fraction form. Instead, we say it's undefined. And that means, since it's on the bottom, that there is no run. And if there is no run, that means I'm not going left and right. Therefore, I have to only be going up and down, and that is a vertical line. Okay, now this is important because we are going to ask you to classify your lines. So you could tell us it rises, it falls, it's horizontal, or it's vertical. Or we will ask you its slope. Does it have a positive slope, a negative slope, no slope, or a zero slope, and an undefined slope? Okay, so keep that in mind. Now we're going to look at some examples of each of these so that you can kind of see the idea, but I wanted to at least get the basic stuff first. So as I slide this up, we are going to look at 4 examples, and we're going to try and determine what is the slope, and then we're going to classify it. Rising, falling, horizontal, or vertical. Okay, now I'm going to first start by graphing the 2 points. So I have the point 1, 2, which means I move right 1 and up 2, and 2, 5 means I go right 2 and up 5. Now, if I draw my line, as I look at this, I can already classify the line. And the line in this case rises, which means it's going to have a positive slope. In order to find that slope, I'm going to take my slope formula. And I'm going to take my second y value of 5 and subtract my first y value of 2, divided by my second x2 minus my first x1. What that says is I get 3 over 1, which means my slope is denoted m, is 3. Now I want to talk about what that means in terms of the graph. If I look to get from the first point to the next point, I go up 3 and over 1. And that's what this is saying. Go up 3 and positive 1, so write 1. I could find additional points from here if I found another point that went up 3 and over 1 to get to the first point I had. And we will talk about that tomorrow when we talk about graphing. So let's try the second one. And I'm going to plot the point 3, 1 and the point 1, 4. And you can see as I connect these, let's try connecting them. I'm going to just erase that and try again. As you connect these, you should be able to see then that the line is going down. There we go. So this means that the line falls. It falls from left to right. We read a book from left to right. We read a graph from left to right. Now the question is, how does it fall? So we find the slope. Again, if I use my slope formula, 4 minus 1 over 1 minus 3. So on top I have 3, on bottom I have negative 2. Now I will tell you, personal preference, but I always take my negative and put it up on top. So I'm going to say my slope is negative 3 over 2. And the reason I do that is because I want to know my movement up and down first and then left or right. But the problem is I would prefer to always go right since we read right. So if I start at my first point, I could look and say I go down 3 and over 2 to get to my next point. And that's what this says. The 3 goes down and the bottom always goes to the right. And that's why I put my negative on top, because I would prefer to always move on the right. Okay, let's try this again. The third one, C, I have 2, 1, 2, negative 1. Let me read my stuff. 2, negative 1, and 2, 2. And if you notice, this creates a vertical line. And a vertical line, we want to talk about slope. Now, you should be able to look above and say a vertical line is undefined. I want to show you how you get that. If I, again, take my second y value minus my first y value, so 2 minus negative 1 over 2 minus 2. On top, subtracting a negative means you add a positive, so 3 over 0. This is never our answer. My slope is undefined. And you can actually write out undefined or you can shorthand it, but you cannot have 0 in the denominator. Okay. Last one, let's go 3, 1 and negative 1, 1. And you'll notice they're at the same level in y values. So as I look at this, this is a horizontal line. And we want to be able to show that the slope is 0 for a horizontal line. So I do the same thing. Y value minus y value over x value minus x value. You get 0 over negative 4. This is not an answer. You cannot leave a fraction with 0 in it. So we say our slope is 0 because 0 is on top. Okay, so as you're looking, again, I think this is something that you've done, you're probably very comfortable with, but we want to make sure that this is drilled in your head as we go forward, because if we don't do slope, the rest of the chapter is not going to go well. Okay, flip your page over, let's go to the next page. Now you'll notice in this first example at the top that I am not giving you a picture. And actually, I don't want you to use a picture most days. What I want you to do is use the formula, okay, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I want to plug this in. So my second y value is negative 8 minus my first y value is 6 over negative 2 is my first x minus a negative 4 is my y. Now, negative 8 minus 6 is negative 14. And negative 2 plus 4 is 2, so I have a slope of negative 7. Now, you could graph this to make sure that I could go, if I say negative 7 over 1, down 7 and over 1. If you wanted to check that, the best way is the graph, and you could just count your way around. Okay? So just one more to make sure that we're on the right page. Okay. I'm going to transition now into the second part of the lesson, which is parallel and perpendicular lines. And I am told you also did this in geometry, but let's talk about it. Parallel lines will have exactly the same slope. So they will never touch if they are running at the same slope. Two lines are perpendicular if their slopes are, and I'm going to write this as small as I can, opposite reciprocals. Okay, the word reciprocal should be fine. Opposite or negative, I don't like the word negative so much, but opposite reciprocal means you take a fraction and you flip it up and down, and if it was positive, it's now negative. If it was negative, it's now positive. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. In order to tell if lines are parallel or perpendicular or neither, we need to find their slopes. Now, the way I notate this is I say M1, the slope of the first line, and I'm going to find the slope. Okay, 4 minus 0 over 3 minus 1. Well, 4 minus 0 is 4, 3 minus 1 is 2, 4 over 2 is 2. Okay, the slope of my second line, 5 minus 6 over 22 minus 24. So I've got a negative 1 on top. 22 minus 24 is negative 2 on bottom. A negative and a negative cancel out to make a positive. I have positive 1/2. Now, we're going to start with parallel. Are these two exactly the same slope? The answer is no. Are these opposites and reciprocals? They have to be both. Well, they are reciprocals, but the problem is they're not opposites. One, they're both positive. So because I can't say yes to either of those, we say neither. Okay, last one. Let's find the slope of line 1 before we do our story problem. 5 minus negative 1 over 2 minus negative 3. Subtracting a negative means add a positive. I get 6 over 5. Okay, the slope of line 2, 1 minus a negative 4 over negative 3 minus 3. So I added a positive, I get 5 over negative 6. Now let's take a look. They are reciprocals because they flipped. One's positive, one's negative. That means that these are perpendicular. Okay. So we've got two of these. So this is the idea. We're going to ask you all of these type of questions in 2-2. The one thing I do want to look at real quick before we end is an Iraq story question. So I'm going to slide this up. And you'll notice your paper, I believe, says Iraq. Mine doesn't. So I'm going to move this up as far as I can, and I'm actually going to show it to you in Iraq form. So I'm going to put my Iraq in here. And I'm going to skip the rest of the questions. I mean, I don't care so much about these. Okay, so here we go. Oh, I think your version, I'm sorry, mine's an outdated version, but I think yours says find the slope of the forest lands or something like that, doesn't it? And is it forest land? Forest lands. So I'll just add this in real quick while we're talking. Now let's go back through Iraq. R is my work. I is the introduction. O means an opposing view or where you make a mistake. And C is restating your introduction in the conclusion. So let's look at our stuff. In 1983, 87.5% of the land in New Hampshire was forest land. In 2001, 81.1% of the land in New Hampshire was forest land. Now, as I look, I can automatically see that it's going down. So I should have some sort of negative slope. So we want to know the slope of the forest lands. Well, in order to find the slope, we take our percentage, which is our y value, 81.1%, minus 87.5% over, and then we talk about our years, 2001 minus 1983. Okay, what we end up getting is negative 6.4% over 18 years. And we need to make sure that this makes sense in our problem. And so I'm going to go one step further and say negative 0.36% for 1 year. Okay? Now, you could leave it wherever you need, but in your introduction, you need to state something that makes sense. So let's take a look. In my introduction, I would say something like, I have determined that the forest land, sorry for the handwriting, that the forest land decreased by negative 0.36% each year. Or you could say instead of decrease, because the negative is already there, let's change that. How about changed by negative 0.36 each year? Now, where could a person make a mistake? The number one mistake, on the other hand, a person could make a mistake by putting the years, by having the years on top. That's the number one mistake with slope, is that people put the x values on top instead of the y's. Okay, so that's the number one slope mistake. In conclusion, the forest land is decreasing each year. By 0.36%. Good enough. And so we're going to be using IROC as we go through. Again, this is a pretty basic look at IROC, but I want you to know that it is coming back. So that's the end of section 2.2. I hope this has been mostly review for you.